Say I stumbled on it.
No, I didn't stumble on this one. I've always wanted to be in the media. I've always wanted to write. I've always wanted to have certain level of influence in terms of how what people read or saw and how they thought. And I moved and I worked in a pay TV company. I was head of content for a couple of years, yeah.
Okay, but eventually that's how you found yourself working with the Film Censor Board?
Yes.
As Director General?
Mm-hmm. This was 2005.
When you got on the job, what are the sort of things you found? What was the learning curve?
Again, I headed an organization when the industry, which is superintended, which is what we now know as Nollywood, was really rising. It was spreading its influence all across Africa and the rest of the world. But also the industry at that time had serious challenges, and in terms of production values, access to funding, it was huge. Everything was direct to home to video. We didn't have the cinemas as we now have. So it was pretty challenging getting the industry to understand that the same factors that led it to prominence, which is really the ubiquity of digital is everywhere, will also be a huge factor in its possible demise. When I worked at the Film and Video Censors Board, part of our mandate was really to change the organization from being an organization that was taxed from censorship to classification. Even though the name of the organization still bears censorship. But we, in terms of how we operated, the mindset, we changed the logo, we rebranded the organization, and we moved it into the world of classification. And we engaged the industry more. And we started doing what we call the road shows to really lift the profile of the industry. Because also at the same time, what we felt was that when these producers who creating this thing thinking that it doesn't have any effect, we're just doing it to make money, when they see the tremendous impact that the creative work that they're doing has, not only in Nigeria but across the world, then they will sit up and say, okay, now I know this thing, people really take it seriously, therefore I should take my own craft even more seriously. So we tried to do that. We tried to make government realize that this was an industry of strategic national importance. So we pushed and pushed and pushed to get funding. And I think at the tail end of my tenure.
One thing I know that is credited to you is it a creation on DSTV of
African Magic?
African Magic.
Yeah.
What do you have to say about that?
As I said, when I worked in MultiChoice in the 90s, my major job was, I was responsible for local content. It wasn't the fancy end of the job. It was really going into the markets and buying content and shuttling it and putting it out there. And so when the business made a transition from cable to satellite, and we still had the same obligation to put out local content on satellite, so we moved. I went to the board said, look, we need to have local content on the satellite as well. And there's some of my colleagues then, I wouldn't take the credit alone, who helped, and we managed to push and get funding to do the.
Well, you stayed in the film board for 7 years. Yeah. Did you expect to find yourself in the National Broadcasting Commission? Was it something you had always thought about?
I did my tenure at the Film and Video Censors Board. When my tenure was up, I left, went back to my practice as a media consultant. A year later, I got offered this position, in the position of the Director General of the broadcast. The same thing. Once you have a mindset as a regulator, the work is similar, because the most important thing is that you understand that your work as a facilitator, your work as a regulator is to make sure that the consumers get benefit of a public good.
So what did you have in mind when you took up the job of a DG, National Broadcasting Commission?
The number one priority at that point in time was to make sure that the biggest national project was this transition from analog broadcasting to digital, and how to do that in the most effective manner, and how to do that in a way that a country gets the most benefit. I think that was fundamental for me.
As we talk, that has not happened.
Because, again, it's a very complicated project, because it's a project. It's what you call a change management project. It involves just let me put it this way. Imagine an industry. Broadcasting has been with us since 1959, I suppose, and so it was largely state controlled until about 1993, 94. It requires a lot of money to set up. There's a lot of interest because broadcasting feeds directly to people who consume the news and information that comes out of radio and television stations, affects how they vote, how they think. So it's a hugely strategic industry. It has huge political ramifications and impact. So obviously the owners are politically exposed as well. So, heading that organization presents its own challenges in terms of the decisions you make or decisions you fail to make. Each has, consequences. So my task at that time was ensuring that all the different stakeholders involved in this project, that they see that this was a project that will benefit them and the country, as well as the at large.
Well, all that has happened so far, as far as some of us recall, is after 2 years, the EFCC has been on your case, chasing you all over Nigeria, on all kinds of charges. Has it stopped, really?
Not really. I mean, there's a...
You sleep with one eye open.
Yes, it was challenging in doing your work, to be publicly crucified and labeled as corrupt, as a thief and all of that. All I would say is that during my tenure, we did everything by the book. Everything was done by the book. All the processes, all the approvals, all the process was done by the book. So in that is as much as I can say.
Do you think you accomplished all you needed to at the time you were leaving?
Well, no. I mean, if your tenure is cut short, there's no point saying that. That's the fact of it is the fact of it. Your tenure, your employer is the federal government, the president is your employer. The president says he no longer wants your services. That's it.
Does it look like the DSO thing is ever going to be accomplished?
I think it will be accomplished. I can't say. I mean, the fundamentals.
You must have run it up to 7 points.
Yeah. What we did, like I said, what we did was to raise the initial money that was required. We raised 34 billion. Which was the whole budget for the whole process. As at that time, the way we costed it was in the region of 60 billion, give or take, depending on the some of the elements that either the government wanted us to do or not to do. But we'll say about 58 billion. So we raised 34 billion, and we used it to start the process. But we even then we knew that was not going to it wasn't going to be sufficient. So there's two things you do. If you let government drive it, then government has to fund it. If you, on the other hand, let the private sector drive the process, then the private sector will look for the money and they will drive the process. But because government felt there's certain fundamentals that government want to make sure that free-to-air televisions remains the bedrock of broadcasting. Therefore, government had to step in to fund that.
If you were asked where you probably put in more, the Film Board or NBC, in terms of accomplishment?
The number one thing is as far as NBC is concerned, there are two different things to some extent. But I think the greatest thing I would say was being able to lay the foundation for the digital transition to happen, and doing it in a way that didn't take money from government. So in other words, we didn't go to public purse. We raised the money from the private sector. So in terms of doing, and we did it in a way that actually other regulators across the continent were like, oh, this is the way to go. I think the way that Nigeria has done it is the best way to do it. And other countries from Ethiopia, Southern Africa were looking at how we did it. And that's how a lot of people are beginning to do it now.